up into the high teens, perhaps, even where it's grey. We'll see temperatures into the teens. This evening, it stays largely dry and fine, but it could turn quite misty again quite quickly, especially over central and eastern parts of England. Some dense patches of fog are possible that, again, could linger for much of Sunday. Still a bit breezy in the west, keeping skies a little clear here. And again, for most, it is going to be a very mild night, with most towns and cities staying in double digits. The details for Sunday, well, again, likely to start pretty drab, misty, murky, even foggy. That mist and fog will take a while to clear over eastern counties of England. Some will stay gloomy all day. Further west, a weather front will eventually bring some rain into the west of Northern Ireland, although I suspect Belfast will stay dry until dusk. Elsewhere tomorrow, most places, again, seeing some sunny spells, and it is going to be mild, even where it's cloudy, 13 or 14, with some sunshine. Temperatures, again, getting into the high teens. Could be quite foggy for Monday morning's commute, but we will see a change through next week, turning wet on Tuesday, turning less warm, but still around average.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dewbs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Steyn. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness, brilliant.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland. On TV,
on radio and online.
We're proud to be
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dewbs & Co. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Dewbs & Co.
Hello and welcome, I'm Alastair Stewart, and for the next 2 hours I'll be keeping you company on TV and radio with the stories that really matter across the country. We've plenty coming up, including I'll be discussing the economic impact of strike action ahead of the autumn statement next week, money-saving tips for renters, and we have a brilliant interview with a sports journalist legend ahead of the Qatar World Cup. But first, let's bring you right up to date with all of the day's news. Here's Tamsin Roberts.
Alastair, thank you. Good afternoon. It's 12 o'clock. Here's the latest from the GB newsroom. There have been scenes of jubilation across Ukraine after the liberation of the city of Kherson from Russian control. Kherson was the only regional capital city captured by Russian troops since the invasion began in February. Vladimir Putin's spokesperson has denied the move is a defeat, saying the region remains part of Russian territory after it was annexed in September. Ukraine's Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba says there isn't a single indicator that Russia is sincerely seeking peace talks.
The only response we always received from them, even when we sat down at the table, was, here is the list of ultimatums, take it or leave it. And the set of these ultimatums meant full capitulation and unconditional surrender of Ukraine.
The Prime Minister is considering cuts to defence spending amid rising inflation when he unveils his budget next week. The 2019 Conservative manifesto pledged to increase the defence budget by at least 0.5% above inflation every year. The department is expected to get a cash funding increase, but it's been suggested in real terms this will be devalued by inflation, which currently stands at 10%. Former chief economist at the Cabinet Office, Jonathan Portes, told GB News he thinks cuts to public spending is the wrong move.
The UK clearly does need tax rises for fiscal sustainability because we need to finance a decent quality public services. That doesn't necessarily mean we need to do that all right away. And it certainly doesn't mean we need to cut public spending, which in my view would be, in general, quite the wrong thing to do.
The Chancellor is being urged to extend the 5p cut in fuel duty, which was set to remain in place until March next year. The AA is pushing for the extension amid the high costs for motorists. Their latest research also shows more than 70% of drivers are being deterred from going electric amid rising electricity prices. Counting continues in the US midterm elections, with the race for control of the US Congress neck and neck. Republicans are favourites to win the House of Representatives, securing 211 seats. They need an additional 7 seats to secure a majority. But the fight for the Senate is on the edge, with both Republicans and Democrats having 49 votes. The biggest concerns for voters are the economy and abortion. Albanian nationals are staging a large protest in London against the British government's immigration policies. Close to 40,000 migrants have crossed the English Channel in small boats so far this year. Earlier this month, the Home Secretary likened the number of asylum seekers travelling from Albania to an invasion. Britain and France are expected to agree a deal as soon as Monday to ramp up their joint efforts to stop illegal migrants from making the journey across the Channel. The Women's England rugby team have suffered heartbreak after losing to New Zealand in the World Cup final. England's Red Roses dominated the first half, but their rivals, the Black Ferns, came back strong, scoring a try in the last 9 minutes to give a 34-31 victory. The final broke the record for the biggest attendance for a women's rugby match, with more than 40,000 tickets sold. Fans say, despite the loss, they're still proud of the team.
It could have gone either way for quite a lot of the game, so I think in this room everyone was just really passionate about England women and the Loughborough Lightning girls here, so we're all pretty gutted, but we're also really proud of everyone out there. It's a massive honour for them to represent the Rose and put on a great performance like they did today.
Renowned graffiti artist Banksy has revealed his latest artwork on the side of a damaged building in Ukraine. It shows a female gymnast balancing on a damaged building. Murals spotted in and around Kyiv has led to speculation the artist is working in the war-torn country. Another mural, not yet officially claimed by Banksy, shows the Russian president being flipped during a judo match with a little boy. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens, of course. Now, though, it's back to Alastair.
Tamsin, thanks very much indeed. And just picking up on one of the stories that was in Tamsin's bulletin there about the fuel duty campaign, I'm delighted to say that the president of the AA, Edmund King, will be joining me later on in the programme, and I'll be talking to him both about the fuel duty and also whether electric vehicles may, after Thursday, have to pay road tax. So you won't want to miss that. Edmund King, the man who knows, the president of the AA. Now, as we all head into a more worrying phase of the cost of living crisis, the reaction of some key workers is either already making it a lot worse for you or is about to. 100,000 civil servants have voted to go on strike, from job centres to passport office workers. Many services will be disrupted. They're going to join Royal College of Nurses. And Unison is also balloting more than 300,000 other NHS workers. University lecturers have voted to go on strike, and school teachers in England and Wales are considering strikes in the new year. Scottish teachers already intend to go on strike on November the 24th. The train drivers' union ASLEF's announced another wave of strikes, and the newly appointed Minister for Rails, Hugh Merriman, has said the railway strikes have cost the UK economy £500 million this year. He added, "If we don't get the services restored, I am worried that people will give up on rail." Well, talking of rail, meanwhile, the RMT and TSSA rail unions have decided to call off their strike late last week amid some hope that the government are now taking a more positive approach to the negotiations. Well, we'll see. It all falls well short of a general strike, though, and I'm not ruling that out, however. But already, if you need medical treatment, want to get from A to B for work or pleasure, have children at university or at school, expect something important in the post, or need your telephone landline sorted out, it is all going to start to feel a bit that way. And I fear it is likely to get even worse. In next week's autumn statement budget, the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt's expected to pencil in just 2% for public sector pay rises, despite the clamour from the unions, who say the cost of living crisis is already hitting their members hard. Well, here's a harsh truth. It's hitting all of us hard already. But unfortunately, those key workers have the industrial muscle to try to do something about it. Royal Mail and BT are already facing strike action. So today I'm looking at the reasons behind those strikes, their likely impact, and the effect it is all having on young people thinking about what they might want to do in adulthood. I'm delighted to be joined by a renowned educator, a former health secretary, a nurse who's decided she will go on strike, a consultant, an industrial correspondent, and several others. But most importantly, we want to hear what you think. You may be furious at what looks as to some as greed or selfishness, or you may have sympathy with some of those workers planning to take strike action. Do let me know. You can email your thoughts at gbviews@gbnews.uk. You can tweet at GBNews. You can tweet me directly, or of course you can go on Facebook, and I will share the best as we go along. Joan gets the game underway. No one wins with strikes except the unions. It's pathetic that NHS, teachers, railways, etc. are even contemplating it. Well, contemplating it they are. With me in the studio to get our conversation underway, I'm delighted to say, is a good friend of mine, political commentator and journalist Benedict Spence, who has written for a range of newspapers, not least City AM. And I underline that because this clearly isn't only disgruntled public sector workers. It's across the spectrum. Inflation over 10%, pay offers on the table 4 or 5% or zero. It's across the piece.
It is. And I mean, with the country effectively in recession already, expected to stay in recession for a very long time, it is going to hit everybody. And that's only going to be compounded by government decisions to raise taxes or not reduce taxes or freeze taxes in some cases that were promised to be cut. It is going to hit everybody across the board. And it's a rather tricky situation because somebody like me, who is more inclined to say to people, yeah, you know, use what leverage you have to go get your bag to look after yourself because things are going to get very difficult, would normally sort of look at, let's take the example of the nurses, you know, haven't really had a pay rise in a very long time, or the rail unions, you know, look at the way that the railways are run in this country, and they are actually run pretty poorly, and say, actually, yes, I can completely understand the reasons behind it. In fact, there are very few, with the exception perhaps of university lecturers, that I kind of think I can't see any reason why you wouldn't strike.
But as always, and you and I have been doing this for so long, we both know that in any industrial dispute, I mean, this isn't only cost of living. That's a really complex and profound point. It is also 9 times out of 10 bad management.
Yes.
And as you say, the railways, Aviva particularly, is just appalling and just quite dreadful. But also we heard yesterday that the management of the NHS is such that they are spending billions of pounds on agency nurses, even consultants being offered money to come in and do a shift. I mean, OK, there may be labour shortages, but that's just bad management.
It is, and I think that that's ultimately what it comes down to, is that people are talking about they want pay rises, they want more money thrown into the services that they work for. The promise is not actually coming for necessarily better services with that money. It's almost just sort of prop it up. And we are heading, you know, for a long time it's been said that people in the UK, what they want is an American-style tax system and Scandinavian-style services. And what we seem to be heading for is the complete inverse of that. We're going to have Scandinavian-style taxes and American-style services. And, really, I think that that's where it begins to take the biscuit slightly. Everybody can say, yes, we're in a very difficult situation and you need to look after yourself and you can use whatever means you have at your disposal to do that. But if everybody is struggling, actually, and you going on strike is going to adversely affect the economy and lots of different people, and for that you're going to get enough money to keep you doing the job that you were doing at the same standard because there's no institutional reform, because also a lot of these unions, a lot of people actually do oppose institutional reform. Try and have a conversation about the NHS in this country, you will get nothing but obstinance. I think a lot of people say, well, actually, what is the benefit of this to the broader society?
I want to broaden it out because I was thinking long and hard about this last night as I wrote that introduction, and 1978-79 kept coming back to my mind, winter of discontent, when, apart from anything else, it was very obvious that there were very large groups of seriously disgruntled workers, both in the private and in the public sector, who, despite there being a Labour government under Jim Callaghan in power, decided the time had come to put the boot in because they wanted a change of government. And lo and behold, they got Margaret Thatcher.
Yeah, it's odd, isn't it? It's often the governments that are trying to appease everybody, they're the ones that take the biggest kicking. And actually, I think what you are seeing is a little bit of that with Rishi Sunak. The whole idea of the adults are back in charge, and it's trying to sort of balance things out and appeal to the centre. And actually, I don't think that is what most people want. They were very opposed to Liz Truss, who went go for growth at all costs. But it does seem to have swung slightly too far the other way. I think the problem is, in the Tory party, does there exist that sort of revolutionary figure who is going to go for growth, but actually has the means to do it?
There wasn't, they threw her out.
Well, this was the thing. But also, Margaret Thatcher had, services and things to sell off. She had the national silver to sell off, which she did. There was also North Sea oil. We have, fossil fuels in this country, but we are steadfastly opposed to using them, to exploiting them in any capacity. We have the ability to build more houses, which would solve a great part of the productivity issues in this country. Voters who are angry about that everything that's going on are steadfastly opposed to houses being built in their area. So it's a very difficult thing to actually square because there is no politician really promising that change, apart from the one that we did just get rid of, because he was roundly condemned for being useless.
And Kwasi Kwarteng doing his famous mea culpa earlier in the week, it was all Liz's fault, not even my fault. I mean, it is not the most edifying of images. The final point is, I mentioned 79 and Callaghan. If the unions are successful and bring down yet another Prime Minister or bring down this Conservative government, they will get Starmer, they will get Labour. All of the polls are crystal clear on that right now, which is why there hopefully and probably won't be a general election for some time. It's very tricky for Starmer as well. He's already had to sack one senior figure from his front bench team for attending a picket line when told not to. He's very difficult for him not saying, yes, I support these people who support me. It's not the easiest hand to play for Starmer.
It's not, but actually I think that you have to be a bit grown up about this and a bit cutthroat and say that those people are going to vote Labour at the general election come what may. Actually, the people on the picket line, they're not going to start, a few of them might, but they're not actually en masse going to go to some upstart Communist Party or something like that. There isn't the tendency in this country, there isn't the support for that. So they are going to vote for Keir Starmer. So Keir Starmer has to maintain the course. He has to stay as close to the centre as he can. Veering to the left or giving in to leftist tendencies in his party, it's not actually going to win him anything. It only serves to alienate him from people who might be tempted over from the Tories or the Lib Dems or from just not voting at all.
All right. We've asked you to come back at 1 o'clock to reflect on some more of the emails that are coming in from our viewers and listeners who will have heard what you've just said and will reflect upon it. So for the time being, Benedict Spence, thank you very much indeed. See you at 1. That was Benedict Spence, journalist and political commentator. I'm delighted now to be joined by Alan Jones, who's the industrial correspondent for PA Media. PA stands for Press Association. It's an absolutely brilliant, impartial organisation that gathers news right across the country and the world, feeds it to people like us. It's a genuine source rather than somebody whispering in your ear in a bar down in Westminster. They're the genuine article, and Alan is the top man on industrial affairs. Do you think that we are heading for something that looks a bit like a general strike, even if it isn't the formal thing that we last saw back in the 1920s?
Hi, Alastair. I mean, there's no question we are. I mean, we're almost there already, and if people weren't quite sure, then these last few days have confirmed it. You've had the Royal College of Nursing announcing their members have voted to go on strike. You've had the PCS announcing 100,000 of their members have voted to go on strike. You had the Lecturers' Union earlier announcing 3 days of strikes. So, I mean, there's no question, I think. I'm not exactly sure when, but I think probably before the end of the year or possibly possibly into the new year, we will see the biggest outbreak of industrial action since 1979. In fact, the NHS is going to be the big one. I've been saying this for a while, and it started. The GMB union have just announced this morning that their members working for the Scottish Ambulance Service are going to go on strike for one day at the end of the month. So, it's already starting.
Absolutely. And not everybody uses the trains, not everybody uses BT, not everybody uses the passport office, but everybody uses the NHS. We're talking to a nurse later on in the programme, an ordinary member of the RCN who for the first time in her life has said, yes, now is the time. The government, it strikes me as well, this afternoon, Alan, are not playing it brilliantly. As far as the NHS is concerned, and I agree completely with you, that is the eye of the storm. You've got Barclay saying the NHS doesn't even need more money, according to the Telegraph and the Times. He has said to the Treasury, no, we're all right, we can live within our means. What are they playing at?
Well, I mean, I speak to the unions a lot, and the unions just do not understand what the government is doing, not just with the NHS, but with all these disputes. There's been no government or very little government involvement in the rail disputes. I think it's pretty clear the government should have got involved months ago. And some of the comments coming out of ministers about health workers, just incredible. There was one comment in the week about how nurses go to food banks because their relationships break down. It is incredible. Yeah. The health secretary did meet the RCN leaders the other day, but again, the unions think when that happens, it's more of a kind of box ticking exercise. I feel like nothing concrete is coming out of any of these meetings, discussions, interviews that we're getting from government ministers. And I think we're at the stage now where, unless the government want to see millions of people going on strike, because I'm sure they don't, they're going to have to do something.
Do you think that the public mood still matters in these things? Because certainly as far as the nurses are concerned, rather than perhaps any other group of workers, there has always been a deep-rooted public sympathy, even empathy for the nurses. They're great men and women who do terrifically important work in very, very tough times. But if they down tools and someone you care about can't get a hospital appointment, can't be properly looked after, even cancer treatment will be on bank holiday rules, the public warmth will go out of the window. Does that matter?
Oh, I mean, any dispute, you talk to any union leader, any dispute they run, they've got to have public support. They need the support of their members first and foremost, obviously, but they do need public support. And I mean, we'll have to wait and see, but I think it's pretty clear the nurses will get massive public support. You're bound to get people very unhappy about missed appointments, but one of the threads running through this now, Alastair, not just about pay, is the NHS unions are saying they're doing this partly to save the NHS. There's already monster delays. I mean, the most horrendous stories about people waiting in ambulances for hours. Millions of people waiting for operations. So, if there is a strike, there will be minimum service levels at some hospitals. You talk to some union leaders, they say already in some hospitals there are minimum service levels. I'm glad you're getting some actual nurses and some staff on, because they will tell you what's happening on the front line. It is staggering, some of the stories we're hearing.
The final point, and it's the same point I put to Benedict there at the end. Given your years of experience and the range of people that you talk to, Alan, do you sense that this is a group of trade union leaders, pretty experienced, pretty accomplished, who've decided, right, the time has come for the coup de grace and put the boot into this government?
No, I don't actually. I think not even for once, but I think these disputes, they're coming from the bottom up. So, for example, I was talking to a rail union leader the other day, and he's been around the country in the last couple of weeks. And the message he's getting back from his members is they want more strikes because nothing is happening. You don't get tens of thousands of nurses voting to go on strike because a union leader's telling them. This is why I'm saying, and it's great you're having people on. They will tell you at the front line what's happening. This is why they're going on strike. It's nothing to do with union leaders telling them what to do.
A really crucial point to end on. Alan, always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed for your wisdom and your experience. Alan Jones there, the industrial editor of the Press Association. And joining me now is another good friend of mine whose views I greatly respect and I really wanted to hear from on this particular subject. Steve Chalk is a leading educationist and he's the founder of the Oasis Academy Trust, which has 52 schools. Barbara has just tweeted, Steve, to say, children have suffered enough during the pandemic. As usual, it's the children who'll suffer most. With those parents who can't afford extra childcare, they'll have to take unpaid time off work. They're also the ones who can't afford extra tuition. Do you sense out there in your sector that there is a strike in the offing here in England and Wales?
Yes, Alastair, I don't know whether you can hear me. Can you hear me clearly?
I can.
Yeah. OK, I picked up your question. Yes. I think there is a strike coming, and I'm often asked as an academy leader, we have 52 schools around the country, what I think of this, because it will disrupt children's education. All I can tell you is that we have thousands of children in homes right now who cannot, there's no money to feed them. One of our head teachers wrote to me yesterday just to say that she'd been into a home with 2 children from the school who'd not eaten for 2 days. There were 7 other adults and children living in a squash flat. It was freezing cold, and she gave them enough food for the week. So we have to reach a place where the state is taking care of people. We can't be in this situation where we have this growing divide between the rich and the very, very, very poor, this gulf. So,
but we're stuck in that.
A strike will be painful, Alastair, but people have the right to call for more, don't they?
OK, yeah, but it's fascinating how you broadened it out there, because I don't speak for the government. I don't hold a candle for them either, as you well know. But the government would say on that last point that you've made, the teachers have got job security and it's not a bad salary. But in terms of the children are concerned, they have attempted as a government to protect universal credit. They have given billions of pounds to try and make those energy bills bearable. There's money coming through virtually every other week. You get to a point, Steve, and you and I have known each other for years, where government either has to say enough is enough, or, do you know what, we're going to break the bank.
Yes, I realise, Alastair, it's very difficult, but I don't think it's binary either. We have more and more of our own staff using our food banks. Around the country, we've set up food banks for parents and families, and we've been running those, as you know, for years and years. But we have our own staff using those food banks all of the time. I talked to the leader of a big chain of hotels who wanted to contribute to our food banks, and she said to me, the CEO said to me, what's the best thing we can do to help you? And I said, it's pay staff at least a living wage. We have so many people in schools, not the teachers, but learning assistants, in spite of the rise that they've received, in a situation where they really can't make ends meet. So as I say, it's not binary. We want to keep our schools open, obviously, but we respect everybody's right to stand up and say, we cannot carry on, we can't live. Oasis, by the way, Alastair, we've just launched a scheme to support 2 of the giant hospitals in the area where I live, Guy's and St Thomas's Hospital. They're in the same way. They're hemorrhaging staff. We have to do something to turn this situation around, or everything will collapse.
Final point is you told a school leavers conference. Let's end talking about the young people, because ultimately they're the ones that really matter in all of this. And you told a conference in Cambridge recently, young people are idealistic. They want to serve and make a difference to the world. I spoke to a former president of the Royal College of Nursing yesterday who said they don't want to go into nursing anymore because of the problems. Are you finding the same difficulty in the teaching profession?
No, and I'd also disagree with that comment from the person you mentioned in the health service. We work in the health service as well. We have quite large operations in some hospitals around the country in the A&E departments. What we find is a slightly different thing. Young people leaving university are idealistic. They flood into teaching, and that's what I found when I was speaking in Cambridge. What happens down the line is their idealism slowly gives way. In the teaching profession, 40% of all teachers leave within the first 5 years. They become disenchanted. And I think that's what happens in the nursing profession as well. In fact, my own daughter, one of my daughters, is a GP. And she sees it happening all the time. I remember her delight at becoming a doctor. Now it's a grind for her with no support. I think that's our major problem.
I think it's a really profound debate. I genuinely do, and I actually think it's a lot more than simply the weekly wage or the monthly wage. Steve, you always deliver. It's a pleasure to talk to you. Contentious, we often disagree, but clarity is always welcome. Very best to you and the family. Have a terrific weekend, and thanks for finding time for us.
Thank you, Alastair. Thank you.
Steve's the chief executive of the Oasis Academy Trust. Great guy. Agree with him or disagree with him. Let me know what you think, what he had to say, and also what Alan Jones from the Press Association and Benedict Spence had to say about it too. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends, with lots more coming up on today's programme. We'll be taking a look at all of the political stories from this week as we prepare for that all-important autumn statement stroke budget coming up on Thursday. But first, let's bring you right up to date with the equally important weather.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, and the UK is looking dry for most with sunny spells, but some rain in the far north. Let's take a look at the details. Cloudy across parts of northern and western Scotland, with outbreaks of rain and drizzle at times. Drier and brighter in the south, with highs of 13 Celsius. A dry afternoon across Northern Ireland with patchy cloud and sunny spells. Breezy at the coasts, particularly in the east, and highs of 14 Celsius. Northern England will see a dry afternoon with plenty of sunny spells, especially in the east. Feeling warm in the sunshine. Temperatures around 14 Celsius. Dry with sunny spells across Wales, although perhaps a little cloudier over the hills at times. A light breeze for most, but a little fresher at the coasts. Highs of 15 Celsius. A dry afternoon across the Midlands with plenty of prolonged sunny spells, although a little cloudier to the east. Feeling warm in any sunshine with light winds and highs of 15 Celsius. A cloudy afternoon across East Anglia with some misty conditions at the coast. Any brighter spells confined to the west. Light winds across the region and highs of 14 Celsius. The south of England will see a fine afternoon with plenty of prolonged sunshine, perhaps a little breezy at the coast, but feeling warm with highs of 15 Celsius. Staying dry for most with patchy cloud and some mist and fog developing in the south and east. And that is how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here. You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Hello, good afternoon from the GB Newsroom. I'm Tamsin Roberts. It's 12:31. There have been scenes of jubilation across Ukraine after the liberation of the city of Kherson from Russian control. Kherson was the only regional capital city to be captured by Russian troops since the invasion began in February. The British Ministry of Defence says the withdrawal brings significant reputational damage to Moscow. Vladimir Putin's spokesperson has denied the move is a defeat, saying the region remains part of Russian territory after it was annexed in September. Albanian nationals are staging a large protest in London against the British government's immigration policies. Close to 40,000 migrants have crossed the English Channel in small boats so far this year. Earlier this month, the Home Secretary likened the number of asylum seekers travelling from Albania to an invasion. Britain and France are expected to agree a deal as soon as Monday to ramp up their joint efforts to stop illegal migrants from making the journey across the Channel. The King will pay his staff a bonus of up to £600 to help with the rising cost of living. The Sun reports it will be paid on top of this month's salary and will come from the King's private income. The newspaper also says no taxpayers' money is being used to make the payments. The women's England rugby team have suffered heartbreak after losing to New Zealand in the World Cup final. England's Red Roses dominated the first half, but their rivals, the Black Ferns, came back strong, scoring a try in the last 9 minutes to give a 34-31 victory. The final broke the record for the biggest attendance for women's rugby, with more than 40,000 tickets sold. Renowned graffiti artist Banksy has revealed his latest artwork on the side of a damaged building in Ukraine. It shows a female gymnast balancing on her hands on rubble at the bottom of a destroyed building. Murals spotted in and around Kiev has led to speculation the artist is working in the war-torn country. Another, not yet officially claimed by Banksy, shows the Russian president being flipped during a judo match with a young boy. TV, online and DAB plus radio. This is GB News. Now it's back to Alastair Stewart and friends.
Tamsin, thanks very much indeed. Welcome back. It's, as promised, time to have a quick look at some of the big political stories today. And I'm delighted to say that I am joined live in the studio by GB News political correspondent Arlene Foster. Always a pleasure to talk to you. My theme is grip. Having just spoken to Alan Jones, the industrial editor of the Press Association, and Steve Chalk of the Oasis Trust, Alan said he doesn't think we're on the brink of a general strike, but if the government doesn't get a grip on pay and strikes, it's going to look tricky. And Chalk is saying, unless the government gets a grip on the schools, strike or no, teachers will be leaving hand over fist. It's about grip.
It's incredibly difficult, though, to see how the government is going to get a grip of this, isn't it? Because inflation is 10%. It's continuing to be high into next year. If you're getting less than that as a pay rise, that is a cut. We all know our energy bills going up, our food bills going up. Things like milk, tea has to up 40%. People are seeing huge rises in their day-to-day costs. So it's not surprising, really, is it? I mean, the nurses coming out to say a national strike for the first time ever. Clearly, 17%, it's not going to happen, is it? They're going to get nowhere near 17%. But when inflation is as high as it is, it's very, very difficult to see how the
Chancellor,
going to get...
Chancellor Jeremy Hunt and the Prime Minister, former Chancellor Rishi Sunak, clear as the day is long in all of the papers today and all of the comments they've been making, though, it's tight squeeze on spending, it's up your taxes, up my taxes to defeat inflation. That is not going to be music to anybody who's got the industrial muscle to say, well, OK, unless you give me a decent pay rise, I'm going on strike.
Yeah, and of course the government is bringing forward legislation, aren't they, to minimum service levels in things like on the railways, in transport. But you can't do that across the board. I don't see any way of that happening. And of course, Rishi Sunak...
But a lot of people have been tweeting in saying, and ban public service strikes. No, I don't disagree with you with that reaction to it. But that's what ordinary people out there, who are also the people who want this government to get a grip. I'm just going to change the subject, but still on the issue of grip, because as Tamsin showed you at home now in her news bulletin, a group of Albanian nationals have indeed been protesting in Westminster today about the demonisation of migrants from their country. Follows Home Secretary Suella Braverman's description of the large number of migrants arriving on Britain's shores as, quotes, an invasion. Now, let's come back to the grip point again, because people at home will say, OK, so there was one plane that went last week and took, I think, about a dozen Albanians who were not refugees, were not poor souls living in fear of their lives, were convicted criminals who'd got in, had been arrested, didn't pass the assessment at Manston, got on a plane and went back home. These people are saying, oh, human rights and all the rest of it.
It does seem very clear, doesn't it, that the government does not have a grip, does not have control of our borders. One of the reasons, one of the promises of Brexit, control of our borders, and blatantly in terms of illegal immigration, people crossing the Channel, have not got that in any way, shape or form. Now, it had fallen out of the news slightly because the weather had been bad, but it's a bit calmer again. They're expecting the numbers to hit 40,000 in the next day or so. And the government still has not managed to send anyone to Rwanda. It ended up stuck in the European court, didn't it? The immigration centres with people now having legal challenges because they've been detained far, far longer than they were supposed to be, now bringing cases against the government. And now we have Albanians on Westminster Bridge protesting because they think their people are being demonised. Suella Braverman, when she made that comment a couple of weeks ago in the Commons, very deliberately, I think, using the word invasion, not referring just to Albanians, but of course Albanians are now making up a large percentage of the people coming across.
Absolutely.
And a lot of them are involved in crime. Some of them are claiming asylum.
But a government that has a grip on that. We're looking now at pictures that were recorded just a wee while ago. There it is, Whitehall. You can recognise those classic white buildings on the right there, very much the heart of Whitehall. That is the Albanian flag saying, oh, we're nice people, leave us alone. A government that had a grip, and this is the final point, I'm just being told in my ear, a government that had a grip would be out answering that right now, saying this is what we're doing and we will do more because they're wrong and we're right. Not a dicky bird.
We're too attractive, aren't we, as a country? We are very tolerant, we're very wealthy, we're very accommodating, and that is why so many people want to come here. And people get very upset about human rights.
The people who get most upset are law-abiding folk listening to this conversation, Catherine, who I've just had quite enough of it all. You're coming back in the second hour, I believe. I look forward to that very much indeed. We might even talk about tomatoes and Deputy Prime Ministers, or perhaps we won't. We'll see. Catherine Foster, for the time being, thank you very, very much indeed. You are watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends, with plenty more still to come this afternoon, including...
When you start excluding families, you have a problem, I think. You know, this is a very, very different World Cup. Financially, it's corrupt, isn't it?
Isn't it just? The great veteran sports correspondent and damn good reporter generally, Chris Scudder, discussing the forthcoming Qatar World Cup, but also his brand new book. Yes, I am only plugging it because it's blooming good. It's so rare to find a book about sport that is actually very, very strong, although there is one out there by Tifo as well, which my son contributed to. Enough of that already. All of that still to come, but first, this break. We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Friday and Sunday night from 9, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
We're on the same page again. There's something good happening.
Let Ian finish. Don't be such a cranky.
That mini budget was the tip of the iceberg.
And on Saturday, my show just got bigger. From 8, it's Mark Dolan's Saturday Night In.
You can't govern a country if you can't speak.
Stop talking. My God, we reached the end. I've never been early in my life. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. There's never been a more interesting but also critical time in British politics, and I can't wait to bring you the biggest stories of the day with the best factual accuracy and also a few of my own opinions thrown in. We'll engage in passionate but always polite debate with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Monday to Thursday, 10 till 12 on TV, on radio and online.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Welcome back. It's 12:42. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and friends here on GB News, TV and radio. Now, as I've said several times already this afternoon, the Chancellor's budget is indeed coming up on Thursday, and the AA is urging him to extend the 5p fuel duty cut. The motoring organisation's pushing for the reduction to be extended beyond March due to the continued high pump prices and the cost of living crisis. The AA said that with petrol now in the region of £1.65 a litre and diesel close to £1.90, compares with £1.67 and £1.79 a litre just before the fuel duty kicked in. I am thrilled to bits to be joined now by another good friend of mine, Edmund King, who is the president of the AA, and there he is live. Ironically, Edmund, this was a measure that was introduced by the Prime Minister back in the spring when he was still Chancellor. The Sun newspaper this morning thinks that you've probably got it in the bag.
Well, yeah, good afternoon, Alastair. Good to be with you. Yeah, what we wanted to do was to remind the Prime Minister and indeed the current Chancellor that they did introduce this cut a year ago, almost a year ago, in March, 5p a litre, which was very welcome. But at the time, it said it was only until March next year. So we are stressing to the now Prime Minister, who was the Chancellor, that prices are as high, if not higher. In fact, diesel prices, I saw last night, actually, diesel at a main garage at 194.5 a litre. So that is actually higher.
Yeah, no, I've got those numbers, and I alluded to them in my intro. But there's another point to this as well that I know you feel very strongly about, and ironically, so does the new Education Minister, Robert Halfon, and that is you can do this measure, which Rishi did back in the spring, but you've got to kick what's-its to make sure that every person selling petrol and diesel does it, and does it on day one. Don't you need to have a sub-clause that says it's not just something that would be nice to do, it's something you've got to do right now?
Yeah, I mean, we've been talking to government for a long while about fuel price transparency. And in Northern Ireland, the Consumer Association publish all of the prices so that you can compare them. And if there's a duty reduction, you can see if that duty reduction has been passed on. Now, we talked to the government about that because it is faintly ridiculous that the same garage 20 miles down the road can charge 5 or 6p a litre more. So we do need fuel price transparency. But what we're saying to government, because the prices are high, they're getting more tax anyway from VAT.
Sure.
And therefore, they cannot afford to freeze it. So we don't want to see any increase in duty at all. And we don't want to see the 5p cut reinstated.
All right, final point, and you talk about taxation and the government are doing very well indeed, thank you very much indeed, out of motorists. The same piece in The Sun that is kind of thumbs up for you guys and your campaign suggests that Jeremy Hunt may say that if you own an electric car, come Thursday, you're going to have to start paying road tax like the rest of us who've got either petrol or diesel cars. A, do you think that's likely? And B, is it good, bad or indifferent?
Yeah, I mean, what we've heard from the speculation is that car tax or vehicle excise duty might be introduced for electric cars from 2024-25. So not next year, because the government is keen for there still to be incentives for people to go electric. And one thing we found is with the increasing home electricity costs, it has actually delayed about 70% of people from going electric. If you can go electric, it is still cheaper to run. So at some stage, you know, we know tax will come along. The government is not going to throw away £35 billion a year. But we think it will be a bit too soon now. You've still got to have incentives to get more electric cars on the market.
Sure.
And then you get more used cars on the market when they're sold.
All right, Edmund, let's talk again after the budget on Thursday. Always a pleasure to see you there, and thanks for finding time for us this Saturday afternoon. Edmund King there, the president of the AA, and we'll see if the AA do indeed get what they want for motorists on Thursday. Let's look now at another matter on the agenda in next week's budget. Can anything be done to help the over 65s in privately rented housing? Here's the problem. A recent survey showed that for every rental property, 28 people on average have shown an interest in it. It's a kind of form of bed blocking. Well, joining me now, I'm delighted to say, is Richard Blanco, landlord and property expert. Is there anything that can be done about it, or is it, that's just, I rent this place, I'm 67 years old, and I ain't budging?
Good afternoon, Alastair. Well, yes, this is tricky. I think, you know, the idea is that we've got more older people in the private rented sector in particular now than we used to have, because the social rented sector has shrunk. So it shrunk down to 17%, whereas the private rented sector is 19%. Now, a lot of older people obviously want to stay put because they're concerned that if they try and move, they're probably going to face considerably higher rents. Something like 64% of landlords tell us that they don't raise rents with existing tenants. So, you know, that means that if you stay put, you're less likely to kind of be forced onto a market rent.
But Richard, is it in that box again? I get so fed up with people who say, oh, the government got to do something, got to go. I mean, short of building more houses, particularly houses for the social market, as you describe it, there's nothing the government can do about it. And the government clearly are not going to be investing unless they absolutely have to.
No, I mean, that's exactly it, actually, Alistair. We really need far more council properties. Remember, 3 million were sold off between 1979 and 1995. And that really is the root cause of the current housing crisis, if you like. That's why rentals have been going up, because there just aren't enough properties around.
Well, I've always defended that move that Thatcher made. If you want to buy your own council house, you should be allowed to. But the thing that they got completely wrong, and I think it was William Waldegrave, was that they didn't replace them. That was the big mistake all those years ago. Final point, and it's one I caught my eye this morning in the papers as well, and that which may well ease some pressure on the demand for rented property, and that is that fixed-rate mortgages may have peaked, and the next moves over the next 3 to 6 months may be downward.
I agree with that, actually, yes. And I've been following swap rates quite closely. They're an indication as to where mortgage rates might go. And they have come down by over a percentage point in the last couple of weeks. So I think a lot of commentators think that fixed rates have peaked. It's probably a good time to go onto a tracker if you can do that for a few months, maybe up to a year, and then pick up a fixed rate, which is likely to be much cheaper in a year's time.
No, the reason I'm laughing is that's exactly exactly what my mortgage advisor said to me the other day. And I said, are you sure? I'm sure that guy, I can now say, well, Richard says you're right as well. So there we are. That's great. Richard, a pleasure to talk to you.
Take advice from a mortgage advisor. Yes, absolutely.
I totally agree with that 100%. Richard, great to talk to you about the rental sector always, but also thanks for those informed thoughts on mortgage rates. Keep in touch with us. Thank you very much indeed. Richard Blanco there, landlord and property expert. Now, the World Cup in Qatar starts in just over a week's time. There's been much criticism over whether the competition should be held there, but due to the country's view on human rights and also LGBTQ plus rights. So I spoke to my old mate Chris Scudder yesterday. I say that because I was wearing a different tie and shirt. He's a sports legend as well as being a friend of mine, and is an eyewitness to 7 World Cups. He now has that new book out, Underdogs and Newshounds, and shares the unheard stories of his World Cup adventures. We had a magic conversation. Here it is. Chris Scudder, great to see you. Chris and I have worked together in the recent past as well, but I didn't realise that actually you're slightly fraudulent, because you're not one of those back of the net 4-4-2.
Yeah, always.
You know, there they are in the technical area. You're a reporter first and foremost.
Yeah.
You're a journalist.
It's about words, isn't it? Really, but I'm quite irreverent anyway.
Yeah.
I've always wanted to call it like it is. You know, say it as it is, because people see through that. If you don't do that, be honest. Be honest. The broadcasting world now is about opinionated broadcasting. That's the trend, isn't it? That suits me. To me, it was never about as I say in the book. It's not about groin strains and 4-4-2s. It's about the people, people principally, and the places.
People's passion, but it's also your passion, because not only have you covered professionally more World Cups than anybody else, as far as I can gather, but you've even been to a World Cup on your Todd as a pay-your-own-way fan.
I did that, yeah, because I had to do it. It's because when it stops, which is why I'm going to Qatar as well, by the way. I'll be what I'd call winging it out there, doing some freelance stuff and experiencing what's going to be a very, very different World Cup, because the travelogue part of it is not really going to be there. It's effectively in a big city, isn't it? The one I went as a fan on was Brazil. What a difference. Brazil versus Qatar. How many square miles is Qatar? It's not very many, is it? And Brazil is an enormous country. And Russia was an absolute revelation, not because of the politics. I went there because I wanted to know what really was behind the old Iron Curtain. I went out there and found that there were just as many people watching it, but in a very different way, because the time zones were so huge. Yeah. So and that's what the World Cup should be. To me, that is what this one is going to miss, because when you start excluding fans, you have a problem, I think. Yes. This is a very, very different World Cup. Financially, it's corrupt, isn't it?
Have you ever come across a more jaw-dropping example of irony than Sepp Blatter going on television to say, well, I now recognise on reflection that maybe this was not the best decision FIFA ever made to give the World Cup to Qatar?
Do you know what? He's a discredited figure now.
Totally.
It's funny looking back now. I mean, the years do pass very quickly, don't they? That we forget that those 2 World Cups, that Russia and Qatar, were announced on the very same day. Yes. The very same day. And of course, England was smarting because they wanted to get 2018. As a technical bid, England's was at least the equal of Russia's, at least. But they got 2 votes, I think it was, and there was no justice there. Listen, it was a great World Cup. I've got to be honest. Technically, it was Putin was on his very, very, very best behaviour. He told all his policemen to be on their very, very best. All the hooligans were told to stay off the street or you'd be in trouble. And everyone who did go, and sadly there weren't enough that went from this country.
But do you think Qatar and the gay rights issues, LGBTQ+, that's the most stark example of where the players, take Australia, even the England team, but certainly the fans, have the biggest single challenge to say, look, actually, I just don't think I should be there?
It's a real problem, and I think travelling fans are very divided you've only got to go on social media and see how many people are saying, I will not go. Personally, I think that despite the opposition ideologically, a lot will still go. Not as many as normal, but not many went to Russia either, for different reasons. The issue here is Qatar is, and why it really shouldn't have gone there, is because it's not a suitable venue for what the World Cup should be.
So both England and Wales have qualified for this World Cup. So whose side are you on, Scudder?
Well, I'm English. I was an English kid who went to school in Wales, who grew up as a Brummie football fan, Birmingham City, great club, not Villa.
The other side of that coin, though, is hype and the expectation that's put upon England, and the media are as guilty as anybody. Oh, football's coming home, it's England's turn and what have you. You only have to remember the penalty shootout and the Europeans to know, we're journalists, we're supposed to report on facts, not on hype.
Yeah, that's right, but football's never worked like that. It's not just England, you try being Italian, it's Brazil, this is in the book as well, and one of the most extraordinary experiences I've ever had in any stadium. And in Brazil, I had a lot of those experiences outside stadiums as well, because it's the people's game. It really is the people's game. The majority of fans in Brazil could not afford to get anywhere near the stadiums. Here's one for you, and you may not believe this is true, but it actually was. I bought a ticket for that semi-final, the 7-1 game. Remember the 7-1 game? Which destroyed a nation. I mean, it really did. That I've never seen a reaction like it. That people just could not believe what they were seeing. But they were all priced out. I paid $650 for a seat there, and when I got to the stadium, that seat did not exist. That seat did not exist. And I'm looking at you, FIFA. But the wider point there was the majority of fans watched matches in the street.
Is the world that you loved as a young, up-and-coming reporter changing really profoundly now that the women aren't the underdogs and, let them in, let them have a game as well? They're becoming the best.
They are, and it's absolutely right that the spotlight's falling on them. I mean, listen, England have won the Women's Euros this year as well. The Rugby World Cup is here as well. England doing really well in that. And Qatar, women's rights, not there yet.
No, that's the irony, isn't it?
But listen, one thing I want to stress here is that of all the people going to Qatar, I really hope that people do respect another culture. It's wrong to be preaching about... we talked earlier about who's going, who's not going. And it's such a complex issue, this. There are a number of people who say, if you don't like it, don't go. And people aren't going because of that. So, and the ones that are going are going to respect a country for what it is. But that is a two-way street.
Sure. I agree with you.
A two-way street.
Chris Scudder, thanks for coming in. A real pleasure. Underdogs and newshounds, so much more than just football. And so great to see you again. Chris Scudder, a really lovely guy, and the book Underdogs and Newshounds is out now. A man who started off in hospital broadcasting. All is possible if you've got real talent. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends, with more to come on the programme in our second hour. Speaking to a nurse who until now has never supported strike action. This time she is supporting it. But first, a quick break.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Steyn. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
for helping our great nation.
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV.
On radio and online.
we're proud to be
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Dubes and Kerr.
Hello, good afternoon from the GB Newsroom. I'm Tamsin Roberts. It's 1 minute past 1. Here are the headlines. Dozens of Albanian nationals are protesting in central London against the British government's immigration policies. Many are still furious about the Home Secretary's comments earlier this month when she likened the number of Albanian asylum seekers arriving in the UK to an invasion. Close to 40,000 migrants have crossed the English Channel in small boats so far this year. Britain and France are expected to agree a deal as soon as Monday to ramp up their joint efforts to reduce the numbers. Meanwhile, large groups of migrants have clashed with French police near Dunkirk after the authorities stopped their attempts to cross the Channel. Migrants have been seen attacking French police officers with stones and tree branches. Meanwhile, the force used pepper spray to push them back. GB News was told the vast majority of migrants were young men with 1 or 2 women and children. There have been scenes of jubilation across Ukraine after the liberation of the city of Kherson from Russian control. Kherson was the only regional capital city captured by Russian troops since the invasion began in February. Vladimir Putin's spokesperson has denied the move as a defeat, saying the region remains part of Russian territory after it was annexed in September. Ukraine's Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba says there isn't a single indicator that Russia is sincerely seeking peace talks.
The only response we always received from them, even when we sat down at the table, was, here is the list of ultimatums, take it or leave it. And the set of these ultimatums meant full capitulation and unconditional surrender of Ukraine.
The Prime Minister is considering cuts to defence spending amid rising inflation when he unveils his budget next week. The 2019 Conservative manifesto pledged to increase the defence budget by at least 0.5% above inflation every year. The department is expected to get a cash funding increase, but it's been suggested in real terms this will be devalued by inflation, which currently stands at 10%. The Chancellor, meanwhile, is being urged to extend the 5p cut in fuel duty, which was set to remain in place until March next year. The AA is pushing for the extension amid the high costs for motorists. They say petrol was more than 2p a litre more expensive just before the fuel duty cut. Their latest research also shows more than 70% of drivers are being deterred from going electric amid rising electricity prices. Counting continues in the US midterm elections, with the race for control of the US Congress neck and neck. Republicans are favourites to win the House of Representatives, securing 211 seats. They need an additional 7 seats to secure a majority. But the fight for the Senate is on the edge, with both Republicans and Democrats having 50 votes. The biggest concerns for voters are the economy and abortion. The King will pay staff a bonus of up to £600 to help with rising costs. The Sun reports it will be paid on top of this month's salary and will come from the King's private income. The newspaper also says no taxpayers' money is being used in the payments. The women's England rugby team have suffered heartbreak after losing to New Zealand in the World Cup final. England's Red Roses dominated the first half, but their rivals, the Black Ferns, came back strong, scoring a try in the last 9 minutes to give a 34-31 victory. The final broke the record for the biggest attendance for women's rugby match, with more than 40,000 tickets sold. Fans say despite the loss, they're still proud of the team.
It could have gone either way for quite a lot of the game, so I think in this room everyone was just really passionate about England women and the Loughborough Lightning girls here, so we're all pretty gutted, but we're also really proud of everyone out there. Like, it's a massive honour for them to represent the Rose and put on a great performance like they did today.
Renowned graffiti artist Banksy has revealed his latest artwork on the side of a damaged building in Ukraine. It shows a female gymnast balancing on her hands on rubble at the bottom of a destroyed building. Murals spotted in and around Kyiv has led to speculation that the artist is working in the war-torn country. Another mural, not yet officially claimed by Banksy, shows the Russian president being flipped during a judo match with a young boy. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now, though, it's back to Alastair Stewart and friends.
Tamsin, thanks very much indeed. The Royal College of Nurses Union voted for their first strike in its history this week. The industrial action comes after a long dispute over pay. Members are requesting a 17% pay rise. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak says this request is simply not affordable. I was really keen to get the view from the front line, and I'm delighted to say that Sarah Guest, who has been a nurse for over 36 years and has not supported strike action until now, got in touch with us and was happy to come on and chat to me about it. It really is great to see you. Thank you very much indeed. What changed your mind this time?
Well, over a number of the last 12 years, nurses' pay has failed to keep up with inflation. And so in real terms, year on year, we've had pay cuts. Over a number of years, there's a lot of nurses have left the NHS. In the last year, there's been apparently a 25% increase in the number of staff leaving the NHS. There's shortages of staff on the front line that is actually affecting patient safety. So that nurses can't actually safely care for the patients how they want to care for them. That's really the crux of it. I joined the RCN years ago because they're not politically affiliated to any of the political parties, and they've always been anti-strike. As it happens, myself, I won't actually be going on strike because not enough. The threshold for the number of people actually voting who are eligible to vote in the area, in the district where I work, hasn't been met. So we, there are some areas around the West Midlands area where they are going to be striking, but not in the authority I work at because there's not enough people actually voted to strike.
I only butt into because it's a confusing thought. You're absolutely 100% right. Of course you are, because it affects you. But as far as the RCM ballot's concerned, it's not just a national ballot, one out, all out. No. It's each sector has its own ballot, and only if that sector reaches a majority do they go out. Here's a problem, Sarah. I would love to hear your thoughts on it. And you mentioned about job security and conditions. That if the government were able, not 17%, but perhaps somewhere in the middle, to come up with some extra money for your pay, then that might make more folk either want to come into the profession or stay in the profession. But the kitty will not have the money then to pay them. They might be able to give you a bit more with the cost of living challenges, but they won't be able to employ that woman or that man over there who now wants to become a nurse. I mean, it's a really tricky problem for the government.
It is. I mean, it's a problem across the whole of the public sector, I think, not just nurses. Other healthcare professionals as well are facing challenges to recruitment and retention. The one thing that has made things more difficult with nursing is, for many years, nurses were employed by the NHS when they did the training, and when training first went over to universities, nurses still received a bursary and didn't pay tuition fees. But nurses are now coming out of their training after 3 years with the same amount of debt as my son, who's done an IT degree and is on a far bigger income than what nurses start on.
There was a really brilliant article by a doctor in the Daily Mail earlier in the week exactly about that training scheme, and that was one of his 3 points to sort it out, to then get young folk coming into the profession. But finally, I want to put something to you, and I don't know whether you know Anne-Marie Rafferty, Dame Anne-Marie Rafferty now, but she's a former president of the RCN, and she told me on GB News yesterday that two of the key problems in nursing are that young people no longer see it as the draw that it once was, and that many of those who did are leaving due to low pay stress and the simple pressures of overload.
Yeah, I mean, some nurses around my age are leaving because they've changed the pension scheme, and now the pension scheme that came into being in 2015 is linked to state retirement, state pension age, whereas the pension scheme I joined, you could retire at 55, and people are thinking, I don't want to pay into this. I don't want my money to be tied into retiring at 66 or 67, so they're taking their pensions now, so that, you know, as they originally joined up to do, and some nurses are coming back, but with the abatement rules around the NHS pension scheme, you're not allowed to earn any more money than what you did work full time. So if nurses are coming back after they've retired and they're under 60, they're coming back part-time because they're not allowed to come back full-time, even if they wanted to.
It's an unholy mess from top to bottom, I think, Sarah. Thanks for getting in touch with us, and I want you to keep in touch, even though I now understand you're not going on strike. You voted to go on strike, but because there weren't enough of you in that particular... But keep in touch. We'll talk again if this thing does come to a strike, and maybe talk again after the budget on Thursday. But for the time being, Sarah Guest, NHS nurse, thank you very much indeed for your time this Saturday afternoon.
Okay.
Delighted to say that an old friend of mine, Stephen Doyle, was listening to that, I hope. Stephen's former Conservative Member of Parliament and Health Secretary, ex-chair of the NHS Confederation. He is now a Liberal Democrat. I'm talking to Catherine Foster earlier, our political correspondent, and the word that kept coming to my mind in all of this was grip. It's a shambles, whether it's the amount of money being spent on agency staff, the risk of losing people like Sarah from the profession, the waiting lists. For goodness sakes, have you ever seen anything as bad as this, Stephen?
Well, I think the statistics demonstrate that the problems are worse than they've ever been in the health service. The waiting list figures you quoted, I can also quote to you the problems of getting access to GP surgeries. I can quote to you the problem of waiting times in A&E departments, ambulance waits, and so on. So right across the health service, there are huge problems. And clearly those problems would be made worse if the threat of a nurses' strike did materialise, which is why it's so important that ministers address head-on the issues that are raised by the threat of this strike and seek to avoid it.
Yeah, and that which leaves me confused as well, and I go back almost to my theme of grip, because 48 hours ago I was reading that the RCM were quite pleased because Barclay seemed to be taking a slightly more emollient approach to the pay talks, and both sides welcomed that. That was very good. And then he's reported, a former Chief Secretary, number 2 in the Treasury, reported in the papers this morning of having told the Treasury that NHS doesn't need any more money.
Well, I think if Steve Barclay, as Secretary of State for Health, thinks the NHS doesn't need any more money, he's the only person in the health service who believes that's true. That's not to say, I mean, I heard your interview with Sarah, and you were, of course, wholly right
to say that there are no easy answers in this for ministers, and there are choices to be made. I completely accept that. And I, incidentally, just for the record, don't think a 17% pay increase for nurses is something that can be justified. But ministers need to address the question, and your suggestion that they need to take a grip must be 100% right. There are no easy answers, but there are steps that can be taken to ease the pressures in different parts of the health service. And what Steve Barclay ought to be doing, frankly, 24/7, he should be working long hours as nurses do to find solutions that ease pressures in the different parts of the health and care system. Let me make the point I always do in these conversations, that if you think that the NHS is different from social care, you're missing the point.
And we both will have read in the papers, both yesterday and today, but particularly underlined today, is that Sunak apparently has decided to kick the issue of social care into the long grass yet again. Let me put this to you, because I stressed at the beginning that you've been there in the hot seat, you've watched these things unfold. Is there a real danger here, both for Steve Barclay but also for Rishi Sunak, that they have relied too much on the goodwill of nurses? Nurses are lovely men and women who simply won't go on strike. Are they, and we're looking at Jeremy Hunt now, former Health Secretary, former Chancellor, and Rishi Sunak, former Chancellor, now Prime Minister, are they about to be in for the shock of their lives?
Well, I hope not is the answer, but they will be if they take people for granted. You say I've been in the hot seat, I've been there. As it happens, Alastair, you won't remember this, but I do, that the day I was appointed Health Secretary in 1995, there was indeed at that time a threat of a nurses' strike. And it was clearly one of the first things I had to do. And I'm not claiming any great credit for this, but we did, myself as the minister and all the supporting officials and managers through the health service, we did find a way to relieve the pressure that was building at that time. And that's the challenge that Steve Barclay faces. And of course, Steve Barclay needs to take the Chancellor and the Prime Minister with him on that journey.
Yeah. Final point, for a general observation with your purely political hat on, and I discussed it with Alan Jones from the PA, industrial editor there, and Benedict Spence, the commentator, earlier on. And it's this, it's a double barrel, it's a Purdy of a question. One, the trade unions sense blood. This is a government with its back against the wall, rightly or wrongly, and they're going for broke. And secondly, Sunak and Hunt particularly are so dug into defeating inflation that any other issue, even strikes in hospitals, is at the back of the list. Is that what we are looking at the moment, for better or for worse?
Well, your previous question asked me, is there a danger that the government, all the individuals within it, take nurses for granted? And I think there is a danger, and that's why it's so important that they're seen to engage in conversation. I think there's an equivalent danger, if I may say so, in the question you've just asked, that the trade unions overplay their hand. There is no doubt about public support and sympathy for the nurses, and there's no doubt either that other public sector workers have a case to be made around their pay and conditions. But if the trade unions cross the line and play this as a political game against the government, then I think they will lose public sympathy very quickly. This is about ensuring, in the health service context, that we have the nurses, doctors, all the clinicians and other staff that are required to address the challenges that we started off by talking about, which are the ability of the health service to meet the demands placed upon it in waiting times and emergency care and so on. And that's the issue that both the employers and the trade union staff representatives need to keep at the forefront of their minds.
Stephen, thanks for your time this Saturday afternoon. Always a pleasure, genuinely. Look forward to talking to you again very soon. Stephen Doyle there, former Conservative MP and Health Secretary, and now a Liberal Democrat. supporter. You have been getting in touch on our big topic of the day, the strike actions, whether it be in the hospitals or whether it be in the schools. David says, the school I led in Liverpool gave away much more money in free places to disadvantaged pupils than it received in tax relief, which equals public benefit. I think that's the case for the majority of private schools. Barbara says, no to a teacher's strike. I'm a retired teacher and I changed unions so that I didn't have to strike many years ago. Children have suffered enough during the pandemic, as usual. It's the children who'll suffer most. The children who will suffer most will be those of parents who can't afford extra childcare, and they will have to take unpaid time off work. They're also the ones who can't afford extra tuition. And finally, Joan, no one wins with strikes except the unions. It is pathetic that NHS, teachers, railways, etc. are even contemplating it. Keep your views coming in. We've got another 40 minutes or so of the programme, and I'll try and fit some more in at the end. You can do it gbviews@gbnews.uk or on Twitter or on Facebook or direct to me. Delighted to say that, as promised, Benedict Spence is back now with me in the studio, having listened to all sorts of other people chatting about these matters. But I'm going to bolt together, you'll remember what Alan Jones was saying. Stephen Dorrell, the unions shouldn't risk overplaying their hands, but the nurses potentially are in a very promising position.
I think they are, simply because I think it's very difficult for people to get animated against nurses, especially after the travails of the COVID years. I think everybody remembers, actually, the struggle that we were all prepared to go through to help them because the situation was so bad and because they have been underpaid for so long. It is not a particularly well-paid profession. I know that people talk about, the salaries of some people in the NHS, but nurses generally aren't among them.
And I thought that was particularly interesting with Sarah, who is a nurse, and Dorrell made the same point as well, and that is actually staff shortages are, in a way, the bigger grown-up problem. So, and that's partly because I'm not going to become a nurse now because actually I can earn more down at Tesco's.
Yeah, it's not particularly well paid, but I did think it was also very interesting to juxtapose that with there are staff shortages and that puts undue pressure on all of us, which I think everybody understands. Anybody who's ever been to an A&E ward knows that they are always understaffed. It's a very stressful job. However, juxtapose that with the suggestion that older people in the NHS, older nurses, are looking to leave to take their retirement early because otherwise they won't be allowed to retire at 55. And you kind of sat there thinking, well, hang on a second. 55 is not, a particularly long age. And what you're saying is you want lots of people to come in and alleviate the pressure on you, but you also want to get out very quickly so you can live off the state. And everybody is living
And with respect, that's not just you saying it. Sarah Jones just said it herself.
Yes,
a nurse up in the Midlands.
Exactly.
That her own career expectation was screwed up by silly changes to the pension rules. Doctors are the same.
But there needs to be some understanding that if there is going to be more money put into the NHS, then, part of the reason why there is so much stress on the NHS is because everybody lives a lot longer. That also means, I'm afraid, that people do need to work longer if they want to pay into the system. If they expect the same amount.
It's also got to be a lot better run. And you've got Stephen Dorrell. OK, he's a Liberal Democrat now, so he would put the boot into the Tories, wouldn't he? But so that's fine. That's the nature of politics. But he was saying 24/7, I quote him from memory, Barclay and Sunak have got to get a grip, particularly on the health service, whether it's the pay dispute with the nurses or the waiting lists or the rest of it.
They do. I was going to say this, actually, because it's very interesting to hear a Liberal Democrat saying that, former Tory Liberal Democrat. But we also need to remember, every time in this country where there is any suggestion about reform to the NHS, changing anything that isn't just increasing the spending on it, there are howls of indignation from across the political spectrum, from within the Tory party, from Labour, from the Lib Dems. You're going to sell off the NHS, you're going to privatise it, we're going to have the US system. We are incapable of having a mature conversation in this country, let alone setting out mature plans for how we might have a system more akin to the ones that they have in Europe, about how we might better run the NHS. Yes, it is underfunded. What Mr Barclay is saying is wrong. Almost every other developed country spends more on their healthcare than we do. But also, they allocate the funds much better. They're run a lot more efficiently than ours are. There is a middle ground, but we are completely incapable or just not willing to have that discussion because the NHS has been set up as this sort of sacrosanct thing that cannot be touched. It simply must have more cash put into it.
Some of its most elegant and fiercest critics say it's akin to a religion.
Well, I think that's not unfair. For a long time, it has been. I think we all go back to the Olympic opening ceremony where it was sort of feted alongside the Industrial Revolution, and people do. It is a bit odd, I think, to have a healthcare system that is venerated. But again, I suppose that sort of shows what our priorities are. We're not really talking about teachers going on strike or schools or the damage that was done to young people. it's the elderly, it's healthcare, it's that sort of thing. That is where our priorities lie. And harsh as it may sound, that is the sign, I think, of a society that is destined to atrophy. We're not actually thinking about the future. We're not actually planning ahead. We're thinking about the here and now. What is the disaster? And again, we're talking about people who are unhappy with the changes made to their pensions, about their retirement ages, that sort of thing. We're not actually thinking about the long-term health of these systems. It's what are we doing right now for the people who are in that sort of bracket right now.
But the minute you say anything radical these days, you're absolutely right. I launched a comment on social media about whether private schools should lose their charitable status, which Sir Keir Starmer has said clearly is Labour policy. And just having a discussion with folk about the impact that would have on numbers and fees and the rest of it. But you get into that dilemma of people seeking to shut it down as a conversation. I mean, I would float here, in the context of this conversation, why don't you give tax relief to people who take out private health insurance so that they can get what they want when they want it from their earned taxed income, and also create a space in the health service for someone who hasn't got that amount of money to buy private insurance, and therefore they don't have to wait quite so long. You cannot have that discussion without getting beaten up and being called a nasty Tory right-winger.
Yeah, and this is the problem, I think, is that our politics in this country, this has been said over and over again. In the centre, we're sort of devoid of talent and we're very upset about going one way or the other in case you alienate people, but increasingly people are pushed to the extremes. And we've seen that with the Tory party, we've seen that with Corbynism in the Labour Party for too long. So it is impossible. We're sort of hobbled by, this lack of political flexibility because, as you say, the response straight away from either direction, oh, you're hobbling growth by taxing us too much, oh, you're doing this, that, and the other. And it's not a healthy way to conduct your politics. It's why we find ourselves, in my opinion, in this gridlocked situation.
Absolutely.
Everybody is too afraid to do anything too much because ultimately then, the world falls in on your head politically.
And I will finish by observing something we talked about way back at noon, and that is that there's no finer example of that than the lack of debate over Sunak and Hunt's budget versus Truss's and Kwarteng's budget.
Exactly.
We needed to have a more profound, thoughtful debate about it. We never got it. Benedict, it's always a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Keep in touch. Come in again soon. Look forward to that. Thank you very much indeed. Benedict Spence there. City AM, Independent, all sorts of great newspapers, because he's so good. That's why. And here with us on GB News, which you are indeed watching and listening, with me, Alastair Stewart, and friends. With more still to come on the programme, taking a look at all of the political stories from the week as we gear up for that all-important autumn budget, autumn statement on Thursday. But first, let's bring you up to date with the equally important weather.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, and the UK is looking dry for most with sunny spells, but some rain in the far north. Let's take a look at the details. Cloudy across parts of northern and western Scotland, with outbreaks of rain and drizzle at times. Drier and brighter in the south, with highs of 13 Celsius. A dry afternoon across Northern Ireland with patchy cloud and sunny spells. Breezy at the coasts, particularly in the east, and highs of 14 Celsius. Northern England will see a dry afternoon with plenty of sunny spells, especially in the east. Feeling warm in the sunshine. Temperatures around 14 Celsius. Dry with sunny spells across Wales, although perhaps a little cloudier over the hills at times. A light breeze for most, but a little fresher at the coasts. Highs of 15 Celsius. A dry afternoon across the Midlands with plenty of prolonged sunny spells, although a little cloudier to the east. Feeling warm in any sunshine with light winds and highs of 15 Celsius. A cloudy afternoon across East Anglia with some misty conditions at the coast. Any brighter spells confined to the west. Light winds across the region and highs of 14 Celsius. The south of England will see a fine afternoon with plenty of prolonged sunshine, perhaps a little breezy at the coast, but feeling warm with highs of 15 Celsius. Staying dry for most with patchy cloud and some mist and fog developing in the south and east. And that is how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join me, Arlene Foster, for the briefing on GB News. Every Friday at 3 p.m, I'll give you all the latest political news and analysis, and we'll have robust live debate. To make sure that you're caught up on all of the biggest issues of the day, we'll bring on experts in their field. I'll ask the questions that you'd like to ask. We're not afraid to tackle discussions from all perspectives, including yours. Don't forget, the briefing with me, Arlene Foster, every Friday at 3 p.m. on GB News.
Hello, good afternoon from the GB Newsroom. I'm Tamsin Roberts. Here are the headlines at 1:31. There have been scenes of jubilation across Ukraine after the liberation of the city of Kherson from Russian control. Kherson was the only regional capital city to be captured by Russian troops since the invasion began in February. The British Ministry of Defence says the withdrawal brings significant reputational damage to Moscow. Vladimir Putin's spokesperson has denied the move is a defeat, saying the region remains part of Russian territory after it was annexed in September. Large groups of migrants have clashed with French police near Dunkirk after the authorities stopped their attempts to cross the Channel. Migrants have been seen attacking French police officers with stones and tree branches. Meanwhile, the force used pepper spray to push them back. GB News was told the vast majority of migrants were young men with 1 or 2 women and children. Meanwhile, Albanian nationals are staging a large protest in London against the British government's immigration policies. Close to 40,000 migrants have crossed the English Channel in small boats so far this year. Earlier this month, the Home Secretary likened the number of asylum seekers travelling from Albania to an invasion. Renowned graffiti artist Banksy has revealed his latest artwork on the side of a damaged building in Ukraine. It shows a female gymnast balancing on her hands on rubble at the bottom of a destroyed building. Murals spotted in and around Kiev has led to speculation the artist is working in the war-torn country. Another mural, not yet officially claimed by the artist, shows the Russian president being flipped during a judo match with a young boy. TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Now it's back to Alastair Stewart and friends.
Tamsin, thanks very much indeed. More of your thoughts now on our discussion today about strike action. Audrey gets us underway. If all of the teachers and the nurses leave their jobs for more pay, where are all of the jobs going to come from? Government should call their bluff. Steve says maybe some strikes will prove to be victorious, or rather victories, and out of the ashes, new phoenixes will rise. Well, as Benedict Spence says, we've got to have the conversation about what that phoenix might look like first. Maybe the NHS needs to implode for new localised models to be able to rise. That's a really brilliant thought. Maybe the education system also needs to implode and be taken away from direct government funding, letting local parents design local education for their needs. To me, the main issue is to get national government out of our lives as far as possible and get local communities to take ownership of issues. Steve, thank you for that, and thank you to all of you. We will have time for some more with 26 minutes of the programme, and I've also asked my team if we can look at that tax relief on private schools issue as a particular programme that we'll do a wee bit further along the line. That's become apparent of late that a week in politics really is an extremely long time. News today that the autumn statement may be more severe than expected, with tougher tax rises on the horizon, and with the threat of continuing strike action across several sectors, there is certainly a lot to unpack. And I'm delighted to welcome back into the studio, as promised, Arlene Foster. Before we come to any of that or whatever else you wish to talk about, when we were last talking, there was a demo of Albanians in Westminster saying, "Don't be beastly to us, we're nice people," and you walked straight in and said, "Oh, they're rioting on the beaches of Dunkirk as well."
Yes, well, we don't know how many of them are Albanian, but certainly people are rioting in France today, as we just saw in the news, that want to cross the Channel illegally to come to the UK, and basically the French police have been cracking down really quite hard. They've been slashing boats, and these people have got really very agitated. There's been rioting, there's been use of pepper spray, etc. I mean, it's clearly an awful situation for the French as well, because the French don't want to have to deal with this, but something is going to have to give, isn't it? Because it's getting worse and worse and worse, and the numbers are going up and up and up.
Absolutely. What are you hearing? And I don't wish for you to breach confidences, but you do talk to people well above my pay grade, I know, that one of the main reasons for Sunak going to COP27 was to have that conversation with Emmanuel Macron. The jury is back, and he's a good guy, and they are now wanting to cut this deal. And the newspapers are mixed on it, that it's falling apart or that it's about to be unveiled.
We may see as early as next week, mayn't we? But it's said that there was a deal with the French that was pretty much ready to go earlier in the summer, that had been agreed, was nearly ready to sign, and that when Liz Truss made the comment about Emmanuel Macron, was he friend or foe, she said the jury's out. Emmanuel Macron was understandably very cross about that, and it will thrown in the bin.
It's weird. I had great sympathy with Macron over that. You want to call me beastly publicly, then you can go and sort yourselves out. You know, no niceness from me if you can't be nice to me.
Sure. I mean, Russia and China, friend or foe, yeah, of course. But the French, they're our nearest neighbours. We work closely with them. We have to. So, in some senses, there was a deal that was nearly ready. Now, hopefully, this deal will be unveiled. I think, obviously, it was in the UK's interest that Rishi Sunak did change his mind, did go to COP27. Yeah. Those lovely pictures, because quite often it does matter, doesn't it? The human interaction, when you meet somebody face to face, they seem to get on well, and then there is the motivation to get
and the real
something.
Business is done, as they say, in the margins rather than in front of the spotlight.
Exactly, exactly. But it does matter that he went. I mean, similarly, Rishi Sunak, obviously having a very tough time for lots of reasons, not least the statement coming next week, and various problems with ministers. But he's had a couple of wins. Let's see what happens in terms of details with the migrant deal, but also with the British-Irish Council, positive noises with the Irish Taoiseach. Also, he met Nicola.
Big deal.
He
First
met
Prime
Nicola
Minister
Sturgeon.
since Gordon Brown to attend.
Yeah, nobody had bothered to go since, I think, 2007. And also, he met Nicola Sturgeon. Liz Truss had not bothered to meet the Scottish First Minister. He met her, all smiles again. We shall see. But these visits with international figures, domestic leaders of the other four nations going well, but lots of problems at home.
Sure. And the other dependencies like Jersey and Guernsey, and that matters in the context of Brexit and financial services. Let's finish with a seriously cheeky question from me, which we said we might talk about and touch upon, and it's Tomato Gate. So I think the Observer, Guardian have gone particularly heavily on it. Dominic Raab chucking tomato from his sandwich across the room. There he is, if you're watching us on television, returned to government under Rishi Sunak as Deputy Prime Minister, but much more importantly, as in charge of justice. Now, I've read two versions of this in the papers this morning. Dominic is beastly and just loses his temper at the drop of a hat. Secondly, the civil servants don't like him coming back because he is determined to introduce his Bill of Rights, which does relate to people rioting on the beaches of Dunkirk and people protesting in Whitehall under an Albanian flag. Is he ghastly, or is it about the Bill of Rights?
Depends who you talk to. I mean, he is known as being a hard task master. He's got high standards. He wants things to be done. He's very direct. some Conservative MPs coming out supportive of him today, but others, quite a number of people, saying that he's behaved badly. I mean, I know we make light of it, the throwing of the bits of a Pret tomato salad across the room, but multiple people, when he was appointed back as Minister of Justice, had to be taken aside and told people were in tears because they felt quite traumatised for how he'd previously spoken to them. Antonio Romeo, who's the sort of top civil servant in the Minister of Justice, apparently had to say to him before he came back, you must treat people better, you must be more respectful, read him the Riot Act, supposedly. Now, I think it's important to say there's never been any official complaint about Dominic Raab, but where does wanting work done and done in a certain way and being strict about it, where does that tip into bullying? It's a matter of opinion, isn't it? Sometimes, but clearly he has rubbed a number of people up the wrong way. But as you say...
Who have decided that they will tell The Guardian all about.
And I mean, it's like, you know, Rishi Sunak's only been 2.5 weeks in power. First we had Suella Braverman, not entirely surprising given what had gone before. Then Gavin Williamson again, and now Gavin Williamson's gone, and attention has moved on now to another minister alleged to be behaving badly.
We finish on getting a grip, don't we, as we always do. Catherine Foster, a real pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much indeed for breaking into your Saturday with another shift. It's always a pleasure for me. Thank you very much indeed. Catherine Foster there, GB News political reporter. Indeed, you are watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and friends, with plenty more still to come in the remaining 20 minutes or so of the programme. The number of long waits for cancer therapy have increased significantly in the last 4 years. One specialist says world-class treatments and diagnosis technology is just sitting there gathering dust. I'll be speaking to the author of that observation very shortly, Carol Sikora. But first, a quick break.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Hello, I'm Alastair Stewart, and I'd invite you to join me at noon on Saturdays and Sundays for Alastair Stewart and Friends. I've been in this business for over 40 years. Now, here at GB News, I've never been happier. I get to choose the big stories that really interest me. We hear what you have to say, and you hear what I have to say. I really hope you can join me, noon on Saturdays and Sundays.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by two of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way. Headliners, the late-night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Welcome back. It's just coming up to 1:45. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends on GB News. This week, seen headlines dominated by record NHS waiting times, and among the hardest hit areas are cancer sufferers. New analysis by the Royal College of Radiologists shows that waiting lists for cancer therapy and care have increased significantly in the last 4 years. The COVID pandemic's among the factors being blamed, but some oncologists, including my next guest and good friend, say that this is the worst cancer crisis in their lifetime, with world-class cancer diagnoses and treatment technology left gathering dust and not being deployed to sort it out. Joining me is the author of that, Carol Sikora. former director of the World Health Organization Cancer Programme, and also professor at Buckingham University. Carol, great to see you. It's been a wee while, and I'm glad that we've got back together again. And it was that piece that you wrote that caught my eye. So spell out for folk at home what your solution is to try and make a dent in those worrying waiting lists.
Things have got worse, Alastair, and the two metrics the NHS use, which are reasonable metrics. The first is the number of people being seen within 2 weeks after their GP thinks they've got cancer. That's called the 2-week wait. That's fallen right down to less than 70% of what it should be. The other metric is the number of weeks you have to wait from diagnosis of cancer to the first treatment of cancer. And it should be less than 2 months. And that's a very generous target, as you can imagine. In America, you'd be treated next week. Here, 2 months, okay. But even that target's not being met. So we've got a problem. In addition to that, we don't have the capacity. And unfortunately, both capacity for chemotherapy and capacity for radiotherapy is really lacking. And, we opened a centres called Rutherford Cancer Centres. Yeah. There are 4 of them. The business plan didn't work, and they went bust in June of this year. And here we are in November, and they're still not open. We've got to get these things open. We've got to use every possible bit of capacity for cancer care that we can.
I absolutely agree with you. You will have seen, no doubt, in the Times this morning, NHS Cancer Chief Peter Johnson saying, don't be put off by delays in cancer. It's no longer a death sentence. So here we've got a government that isn't finding the money to get those emergency centres up and running and reduce the waiting list. And we've got the guy in charge of cancer for the NHS saying, not a problem.
He's the medical director for cancer for NHS England. And to say there aren't delays don't matter because we're so good at treating is completely crazy. We know that stage 1 cancer, cure rate 90%. Stage 3 cancer, cure rate 25%. Doesn't matter which it is, breast, lung, colon, prostate, they're all the same. Early stage, treatable, curable in most patients. Later stage, for most patients, they're going to die of that disease. And delay is the cause of the stage migration, as we call it.
The extraordinary thing, and as I say, I know that you've read it, but I'd thoroughly recommend it to other people, is that within the article, he also concedes that if the nurses' strike goes ahead, then cover will be reduced to bank holiday, kind of Boxing Day levels of cover, and so those lists will only get worse. But anyway, I'd say to folk at home, Carol and I have read it. You read it, make your own minds up. We're not here to tell you what to think. This is another area that I know you watch very carefully. And I was saying to Benedict Spence earlier, we need to be able to think the unthinkable to get through these crises. Are more people who can afford it now being forced to go private because they are genuinely in fear of their well-being?
I think there are. People are going to private GPs, they're going to private hospitals to get biopsies. The critical time is the recognition that you've got cancer. Once it's recognized, then you have to get on to treatment. And on the whole, that's not so bad, although the most recent data is bad. And it can't be blamed on COVID. That's the problem. You can blame COVID for a lot of stuff. But now we're a year out of any serious COVID pandemic, and we shouldn't have the capacity problem. And of course, 2 years ago, there was a capacity problem building up even without COVID. So it's all come at once. And I think people will go privately. It's sad because if you can't afford it, surely you've paid your taxes, you're entitled to NHS care. For the medical director of NHS England to say it doesn't matter because we're so good at treating it, I don't think he'd like that for his mother, for example. No, I certainly would if I was told that.
I think that's a very important egalitarian point as much as medical point. The final point is this. I'm slightly concerned it's about bad management across the NHS as well. And I saw you on telly last night talking about agency work and the amount of money that nurses like Sarah, my lovely guest earlier on, who voted to go on strike this time, but even you as a senior consultant going online, the NHS are paying billions of pounds to nurses, consultants, GPs to fill the gaps. I mean, that's bad management as much as anything, isn't it?
Alastair, it's a stopgap, obviously. If a clinic's empty tomorrow and you've got to fill it, you have to get a locum, a temporary agency staff. But the long term, there's no solution. There's no plan. There's no workforce plan for the future. We've got to expand medical school entry. It's been static for the last decade. We've got to expand it, get more doctors, not just in oncology, cancer medicine, but right across the board, more GPs. And we can't just import them. I mean, again, that's a stopgap. By all means, import people for training to allow them to experience UK medicine. But it's got to be more than that. We can't drain poorer countries by paying poorer countries' doctors more money. It's not a solution. We've got to get a proper solution.
As Stephen Dorrell said, we need to get a grip, and as Benedict Spence says, we need to do some radical thinking as well. Carol, it's always a pleasure. I'm glad we've made contact again, and you're always welcome on the programme. I'm sorry it's been so long. Look forward to next time. Great to see you. Professor Carol Sikora there. Oncologist, former WHO expert as well. Now, events are taking place throughout the weekend to commemorate those who gave their lives in conflict. Yesterday, the nation came to a standstill at the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month to remember the fallen with a 2-minute silence noting the armistice. The Prime Minister tweeted, and I quote, "Today and forever we will remember them." And, of course, tomorrow, services of remembrance will be held across the United Kingdom. Our East Midlands reporter, Will Hollis, joined the British Army at Kendrew Barracks in Rutland for their service, ahead of Remembrance Sunday tomorrow. And he sent this report.
A sound so familiar to the British Army, yet it's the silence that follows that matters most. At the 11th hour on the 11th day of the 11th month, we remember them. Lieutenant Ashwell is with the Royal Anglians.
So we are at Kendrew Barracks in Cottesmore, Rutland. All of the service personnel on the camp are coming together with the primary school that is also on camp, and we're coming together to take part in an act of remembrance.
For more than a century, Britain has honoured those who've died in conflicts through remembrance. What began as a way to mark armistice and the end of the Great War now highlights all sacrifice made by the armed forces.
The importance of today is to remember those who have fallen before us, those who've died in the world wars, in the Korean War, in conflicts in the Falklands, Afghanistan, Iraq, and also those who've died out of conflict, to remember them, their families and friends.
In the heart of Rutland, Kendrew Barracks is home to the Army's serving men and women, and often their families. With the school on site, the children at Cottesmore Academy learn of remembrance young.
Virtually all of our children have a parent who is serving in the armed forces. Some children will even have both parents serving in the armed forces. So it's particularly important that we are part of today.
From our biggest cities to our national memorials. For many, remembrance gives time to think of friends and family who've served in the armed forces. For Private Liam Williams back at Kendrew, that's his great-grandparents.
It's an absolute honour to be able to serve in the British Army. Remembrance Day is a big standing point for me. On both sides of my family, great-grandfathers went off to fight in the Second World War. And it really means a lot, and I believe it means a lot to a lot of other people in the unit.
As the British Army moves further forward into the 21st century, Reverend Tom Wilde reminds us how remembrance serves to connect all in the forces.
The people living on this camp, there's an absolute multitude of different nations, different regiments, different cap badges, and all with their own history of conflict and service. And when we remember, what we're allowing people to do is to remember those who these regiments have lost.
The silence observed may be short, but as we look ahead to Remembrance Sunday, the sacrifice it is in place of is beyond words. Will Hollis for GB News in Rutland.
Brilliant report, and I'm delighted now to be joined by Captain Malcolm Farrow, who was a lieutenant commander on board HMS Hermes during the Falklands conflict. And I want to put one thing to you first of all, Captain, if I may, and that's the Prime Minister saying that we will remember them forever. How important is remembrance to you, and how confident are you in that word forever?
The importance is absolutely fundamental. I mean, if we don't remember the past, we have no chance whatever of guiding ourselves through the future. It is absolutely critical and fundamental to remember. So that's the first part of your question. How confident am I? I think I am confident now. Remembrance has gained traction in recent years. There was a period of time during the middle of the Cold War when it was a fairly muted event on Remembrance Day, and the nation as a whole and the towns and villages around the country generally, it was a bit of a passing event. But now it's mainstream. Even in the small towns and villages, the small village where I live, the small town nearby, there'll be a significant turnout tomorrow. People are remembering all over the place. And of course, the young children are involved in this too. So I think the answer to your question is a confident yes.
Excellent. I'm delighted to hear that. And partly, as Macmillan famously said, it's events, dear boy, as those young soldiers talking to Will Hollis demonstrated. And talking of events, you were on watch when HMS Sheffield was struck and sunk. I remember that very clearly as a cub reporter. What do you remember as a lieutenant commander?
I was indeed on watch. I had a pair of headphones on, and I heard the anguished cries on the various radio circuits about what had happened and finding out what had happened and so forth. It was a hell of a shock. But you have to remember that we were absolutely flat out, day and night, day after day, week after week. We knew damn well that somebody was going to get sunk. There were going to be terrible things happening. That's what you train for. And also, of course, when one unit is hit, a ship is hit, an aircraft is attacked or whatever, that doesn't mean that another one isn't going to be hit immediately afterwards. You don't know that. So you have to immediately carry on with whatever it is you're doing tactically to ensure that the best defense is available to protect everything else around. So that's a rather rambling way of saying we just bloody well got on with it. But it was a hell of a shock. And I do remember sort of coming up all standing a bit and saying, oh, my God, what's up? You know, we're in it now, or something like that, probably rather ruder. But we got on with it.
I love it. I love the language, and I love the choice of tone there, Captain, as well. I also remember, as you will do, when you saw the tapes once you'd got back, the reaction of John Nott, the Defence Secretary, and Margaret Thatcher, the Prime Minister at the time. These were big figures who were shocked by it. My final point is this, that one of your jobs was to assess signals that came in and to make decisions on the deployment of forces, maybe in defence of Ship A but not Ship B. Were you aware at the time of that awesome responsibility upon your shoulders?
Yes, because me and all my colleagues, we've been training for 25 years or something for exactly this. So it was, to some extent, I mean, I don't mean this lightly at all, a smooth transition between training and the endless exercises we've been doing for years and years and years into the real thing. We knew what to do. We've been trained for it. We were, I like to think, good at our jobs, and we got on with it. So, yes, it was an awesome responsibility, particularly, of course, for the Admiral. He was the one making the decisions. He was 6 feet to one side of me, making the big decisions. I was a mere lieutenant commander at the time, but I was making smaller decisions. So, yes, of course, but, we got on with it.
Certainly did. Lovely to be reminded of Sandy Woodward there as well. Captain Farrow, an honour to talk to you and a pleasure. Thank you, sir, very much indeed. And I wish you a good weekend, and I know it to be an important one. Thank you very much indeed, sir. That, I'm afraid, is all that we have time for today, but I will be back at midday tomorrow. We'll be looking ahead to the autumn statement, and I'll be asking how worried we should all be about the economy and the plans that it looks as if the government has opted for to fix it. Until then, enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England,
Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio
and online.
We're proud to be
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Every Friday and Sunday night from 9, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
We're on the same page again. There's something weird happening.
Let Ian finish. Don't be such a cranky.
That mini budget was the tip of the iceberg.
And on Saturday, my show just got bigger. From 8, it's Mark Dolan's Saturday Night In.
You can't govern a country if you can't speak.
Stop talking.
My God, we reached the end. I've never been early in my life. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Hello and welcome. This is Real Britain with me, Darren Grimes, on your telly, radio and online. Coming up this hour, we'll be talking about inheritance tax, the nurses' strike and what's the point in reaching net zero if China continue to burn more coal than Sauron's Mordor. But first of all, let's get your news headlines with Tamsin Roberts.
Darren, thank you. Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 2. Here's the latest from the GB newsroom. There have been scenes of jubilation across Ukraine after the liberation of the city of Kherson from Russian control. Kherson was the only regional capital city captured by Russian troops since the invasion began in February. Vladimir Putin's spokesperson has denied the move is a defeat, saying the region remains part of Russian territory after it was annexed in September. Ukraine's Foreign Minister, Dmytro Kuleba, says there isn't a single indicator that Russia is sincerely seeking peace talks.
The only response we always received from them, even when we sat down at the table, was, here is the list of ultimatums, take it or leave it. And the set of these ultimatums meant full capitulation and unconditional surrender of Ukraine.
Large groups of migrants have clashed with French police near Dunkirk after the authorities stopped their attempts to cross the Channel. Migrants have been seen attacking French police officers with stones and tree branches. Meanwhile, the force used pepper spray to push them back. GB News was told the vast majority of migrants were young men, with 1 or 2 women and children. Meanwhile, dozens of Albanian nationals are protesting in central London against the British government's immigration policies. Many are still furious about the Home Secretary's comments earlier this month when she likened the number of Albanian asylum seekers arriving in the UK to an invasion. Close to 40,000 migrants have crossed the English Channel in small boats so far this year. Britain and France are expected to agree a deal as soon as Monday to ramp up their joint efforts to reduce the numbers. Tory MPs have come out in defence of the Deputy Prime Minister after he was accused of being rude and aggressive towards civil servants. It's reported that multiple sources have alleged Dominic Raab created a culture of fear in his previous role as Justice Secretary. Labour described the accusations as deeply troubling, saying they raise more questions about Mr Sunak's judgment by appointing him. Levelling Up Shadow Minister Alex Norris says bullying shouldn't happen in government.
It's cowards that bully their staff, people who, in that power imbalance, can't really do very much about it and simply have to put up with what we've seen happen. I mean, obviously, we're only reading in the last sort of 24 hours some of the issues relating to the Deputy Prime Minister and what he may or may not have thrown, and it's important that that's given the full airing. But we do know what happened with Gavin Williamson, that's accepted. But fundamentally, I just don't think they should do that, and I don't really think that that should be very controversial.
Counting continues in the US midterm elections, with the race for control of the US Congress neck and neck. Republicans are favourites to win the House of Representatives, securing 211 seats. They need an additional 7 seats to secure a majority. But the fight for the Senate is on the edge, with both Republicans and Democrats having 50 votes. The biggest concerns for voters are the economy and abortion rights. The Women's England rugby team have suffered heartbreak after losing to New Zealand in the World Cup final. England's Red Roses dominated the first half, but their rivals, the Black Ferns, came back strong, scoring a try in the last 9 minutes to give a 34-31 victory. The final broke the record for the biggest attendance for a women's rugby match, with more than 40,000 tickets sold. Fans say despite the loss, they're still proud of the team.
It could have gone either way for quite a lot of the game, so I think in this room everyone was just really passionate about England women and the Loughborough Lightning girls here, so we're all pretty gutted, but we're also really proud of everyone out there. Like, it's a massive honour for them to represent the Rose and put on a great performance like they did today.
Renowned graffiti artist Banksy has revealed his latest artwork on the side of a damaged building in Ukraine. It shows a female gymnast balancing on her hands on rubble at the bottom of a destroyed building. Murals spotted in and around Kyiv has led to speculation the artist is working in the war-torn country. Another, not yet officially claimed by Banksy, shows the Russian president being flipped during a judo match with a young boy. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now, though, it's back to Real Britain with Darren Grimes.
Welcome to Real Britain with me, Darren Grimes. Cheers very much for your company. Here's what's coming up over this next hour. Bereaved families will be forced to pay an extra £1 billion in death duties if Rishi Sunak extends the freeze on inheritance tax thresholds for another 2 years. Is this yet another unconservative policy imposed by a supposedly conservative Prime Minister? Let me know. And nurses in the Royal College of Nursing Union have voted for its first UK-wide strike in its entire 106-year history. Rishi Sunak has said that the 17% pay rise requested by a nursing union that's voted to strike isn't affordable. And I tell you what, stop the £11 billion in climate change payments abroad and give that to our nurses instead, Rishi. And later, a report from Oxford University shows that China has emitted more carbon emissions over the past 8 years than the United Kingdom has since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. So why should the UK be paying climate change reparations to China? That's what we're talking about for the next hour. As ever, your thoughts are much more important than mine. Tweet me at GBNews or email me on gbviews@gbnews.uk. I've got it open here, so please be kind. You can watch us online on YouTube, and cheers very much. Now, if I wasn't cancelled before, I probably will be after this. The left likes to claim that we're a nation of immigrants. The truth is that from 1066 for about 900 years, that wasn't the case. In fact, when large groups of people came here before then, it was usually in the form of invasions. The Vikings and the Normans arrived here in pursuit of a better life in England's green and pleasant land. But the pursuit of a better life doesn't mean it was in the citizens' best interests already here. In 1066, historians reckon the armies numbered between 5,000 to 7,000 on